This conference will now be recorded.
Well, welcome to the August meeting of the Arlington Senior Democratic Lunch. Our guest today is Patrick Hope, who is probably the longest serving member of our current Arlington delegation in the General Assembly. And he is specialized in a number of areas. He's been very aware on things like healthcare, prisoners' rights, a wide variety of different issues, and he can talk to you about all of them. Without further ado, I'm going to give you Delegate Patrick Hope.
Okay, let me move over for the couple people that are online. But hi everyone, it's good to see everyone again. It's been about a year since I was. You can applaud if you want to. Well, please don't. I'm told to. It's been about a year since I addressed the senior Dems lunch, and there's been a couple of changes, of course, at least in my life in terms of in the delegation. As mentioned, Bob mentioned, I am the most senior member of the delegation. When you become a senior member of the delegation, they call you the dean of the delegation. And so I think that makes Alfonso mad. But I am the dean of the. It's just a fact. I am the dean of the delegation, and so I'm also have highest seniority. I'm number 14, as mentioned. Someone saw me parking out, so I'm number 14 in seniority in the House of Delegates. When I first started, 15 years ago, you can go pretty fast. That tells you how much turnover there is in the General Assembly. And so you need people that have a lot of longevity because they can get bills passed. As a result of my seniority, I'm also the chair of the courts committee. And that's a tremendous honor, and that's a big change since the last time I addressed you. And one of the things I like to joke about is I'm not the first delegate from Arlington to chair the courts committee. Do you know who the first delegate?
Bob Brink.
Not Bob Brink. Jim Allman. Jim Allman was chair of the courts committee for about 15 years. And there was, and I'm not the first Patrick also to chair the courts committee. Do you know who the first Patrick was? Patrick Henry. So we have a trend here where we start really high and then we start a trajectory to go down. So Ed Holland in the Senate, ironically, also an Arlingtonian, you remember Senator Holland, he chaired the Senate Courts Committee for a number of years. So Arlingtonians have a lot of interest in our courts and in leadership, and I try not to besmirch that legacy in Arlington. So what I wanted to do today is talk to you a little bit about the 2025 session. This you don't get many. Thank you. You don't get many requests to start talking about the 2025 session for a couple reasons. One, it's a little early to have these conversations, but we have been thinking about it. But two, everyone's just so hyper focused on the presidential election, and people even forget that there's a state house going on anymore. But for very good reasons, because this is an incredibly important election. I don't have to tell you how important it is. And there's been a lot of focus and attention to that. But there's also attention on 2025 as well, because not just the session that'll be here in just 5 short months, but also because we're up for reelection in 2025 in the House. And of course, we got a big governor's race as well, too. And so we have a real opportunity before us now to submit our majority in the House, but also take back the governor's mansion and think about what we can do with control over that. So we are hyper focused at the state level on making sure that we do whatever we can to maintain our majority and grow our majority. And so we're thinking about what's going to come back. Well, it never hurts to look back, to look ahead and think about how was this past session and do we have any lessons learned? Well, we have divided government. Just a simple reminder, Governor Youngkin covers the legislative branch as an executive, is a Republican. And so even though we control the legislative branch in the General Assembly, anything that we pass, it's his prerogative to veto the bill. And he took full advantage of that prerogative. I tell you, he has set records over 200 vetoes. I believe it's 201 to be exact. I have to go back and check my records, but it's over 200 vetoes in just this session alone. And that brings his total to around 250, 240. I have to double check. That Well, yeah. Certainly more did get signed into law. I think it's around 1,000, a little over 1,000 got, and that's roughly about 50% sort of batting average that the total bills that get introduced, how many actually get passed. It's probably closer to about 45, 46% were signed into law. But most of those bills that do get signed into law, the vast majority of them pass unanimously. But we always focus on the ones that are very partisan and with good reason. But there's a lot that do get passed. Now, looking at my own record, I passed 30 bills as the most that anyone in the House or Senate passed. The governor vetoed 6 of them. He signed 24 of my bills, still the most of any legislator in House or Senate passed. To give you an idea about how the state functions versus the federal government. In this past Congress, which is considered to be the most unproductive Congress in modern history, they've only passed about 28 laws, whereas I alone passed 25. And to be fair, they passed some big ones that had a lot of stuff in them, but still, Congress is still very unproductive compared to the stuff that we're doing at the state level. So again, as I started to go down this lane, I wanted to talk a little bit about what has happened in the past because you have divided government. There are some things that we can do that we don't need the governor's permission, and that is constitutional amendments. And this coming session is going to be a year that's ripe for 3 constitutional amendments that we've been teeing up, trying to perfect, and in very critical areas for Democrats, especially when you're looking at most of the state wants to see some action in. And one is abortion and reproductive rights. We have an opportunity to enshrine in our Virginia Constitution basic protections to protect a person's rights to reproductive health care. And that's top on our priority list to get that constitutional amendment passed. I'd say the second one that's also on our list to pass is we want to look back at that evil Marshall-Newman amendment and already enshrined in our Constitution that defines marriage between one man and one woman. That is still in there, even though it's not the law of the land, even though the United States Supreme Court and Obergefell ruled us differently than that, it's still, those letters, those words are still in our Constitution. And the significance of that is that if another matter, another issue similar went to the United States Supreme Court, does anyone think that this Supreme Court that has lost so much credibility and legitimacy as an institution would not undermine existing precedent? They absolutely will. They've proven themselves time and again that they will do just that. And so if they did that, then those words that we don't think have meaning in our Virginia Constitution would go into effect almost immediately. So we have got to reverse that law and define marriage as between two separate individuals. And so we're working on language, no matter what their sex is, on that to repeal that awful language. So that's something that we can do to help LGBTQ plus communities of support. Yes.
What is the process for the plan?
Good question. The process for that is it's cumbersome. It's not like other states. You don't see a lot of constitutional amendments, although you will see one this year on your ballot. We can talk a little bit about that in a second. But it is very cumbersome, and it's really hard because it should be hard to amend your Constitution. You see, there's some states where you're going to go and you're going to vote and you see pages on pages of different constitutional amendments, mainly because their process is they collect voting signatures and they can get something on the ballot. In Virginia, however, there's only one method to do it. You have to go through the General Assembly. You have to pass a resolution in the General Assembly.
In each house is the General Assembly.
In each house. So it has to pass word for word by each house in the first session. Then you have to have an intervening election, which we will have in 2025 election in November. And then you come back in the 2026 session and pass the exact same resolution word for word. And if that passes both the House and the Senate, and again, Cut out the governor. Governor never sees it.
50%.
50 plus 1. Yeah, 50 plus 1. So it has to be just a majority. Then the voters will get these amendments that I'm describing here. Oh yeah, 50 plus 1 is what's for them. So they'll get the amendment in 2026 election. You'll see it on your ballot in November of 2026. Now the third one, and thank you for that question because that's really important. The third area will be on voting rights that you'll also see that we can make some progress on. And this is the automatic restoration of voting rights. There may be only one other state that's not automatically done. Our process in Virginia is that when you're a felon and you do get released from prison, you have to petition the governor to get their permission to get your restoration of your voting rights back.
We have to pause for a moment and salute our.
We have to all hail to the clerk, the best clerk of the court. Oh my gosh. How about that? What a great honor. That's nice. What great news.
He's always been the delegate of choice of the Arlington Senior Democrat.
Right. Well, he's been the only Arlington only. But
You're gonna stop talking nice about me, everyone. Stop. My audience of two that I was selected by the Virginia Clerks Association as the Legislative of the Year for 2024. So I'm so excited about that. I can't wait. Circuit Court clerks. So
my friends that are Facebook folks are very impressed that I know the chair.
okay, I'll do whatever you tell me.
You also know the head judge of the Arlington Circuit Courts.
Right.
Yeah.
But
So anyway, so I was saying that obviously those are areas that we feel very confident in that we can take some decisive action and progress in. While we were talking about constitutional amendments that we're likely to see in 2025. Otherwise, I think that we'll be very practical about some things that we can pass. I know on the gun side, I think that we might be doing some things on gun violence prevention. Again, anticipating that the governor will not sign a lot of these bills. Just to give you an idea of what he did veto this past year, he vetoed a ban on assault weapons. He vetoed a ban on ghost guns. He vetoed a ban on having fingerprinting for concealed handgun permits, requiring fingerprinting for hand, so make sure that we know the person you say you're actually that person, or even live fire training. I mean, it's not unusual for you to go drive a car, you have to take a test. Why wouldn't you have to do the same to get a concealed handgun permit? So different things like that he has vetoed. Yeah, Paula?
That like how or
I don't know if that's true or not. It may be because there's quite a few Northern Virginians and that are Democrats that are sending bills. I think probably proportionally we probably have the most bills that are getting through just because of our politics. But I do sense that he's sort of an equal opportunity bill killer, and I'm not sure that he looked at the name of the patron of the bill when he did that. But he did veto 6 of my bills, but I don't have the record by a long shot. That would be another Arlington/Alexandria delegate named our senator named Adam Ebbett. He holds the record for the lifetime of vetoes. Now, I will tell you this is kind of an interesting, because you never know, you'll be at a cocktail party. Well, this will come up. My bill when I had a bill under Governor McDonald, that his first bill that he vetoed as governor was my bill. On Governor Youngkin, the first bill that he vetoed was also my bill. So a little bit, if that comes up at a cocktail party on Jeopardy or something like that, I hold the record for both first vetoes for those governors. I'm sure the governor doesn't even know who I am other than likes vetoing my bills. That's sort of a snapshot, I think, of what we can expect in 2025. A lot of us are planning to bring a lot of bills that are sort of home cooking and things like that, that are things that we want to try to get passed. You might have heard in the news something of interest of mine is to take a look at Arlington's governance. We've haven't looked at this question of our governance since 1932. 1932 was the last time that we looked at. And if you look at over the trend over the last, I'd say 30 to 40 years, has been the General Assembly to give power to the localities. But Arlington, for reasons that are, we have our own charter and our own system of government, we haven't used that opportunity to update our system of government as well. I don't want to change our form of government, but I do want to update it to give us the same powers. It's not an understatement to say that Arlington is the weakest county board in all of Virginia for certainly for a county of our size, and certainly in all of Northern Virginia, we're the weakest. And so there's just certain powers. Now, none of the powers would be required to exercise, but they would all be permissive. But they would be allowed to exercise if this board or a future board wanted to exercise it. I'll give you an example of why it's frustrating. The board asked us, asked me 2 years ago, asked the delegation 2 years ago, to give them the permission to hire a police auditor. Now, no other jurisdiction in Virginia has to pass a law to get permission for their board, their city council, to make a hire. There's only one, and it's Arlington. Well, it's because the way our system of government was set up, our charter was set up in the code. No one else has to get permission. So we have under statute, we hire our county manager, our county clerk, our county attorney, and we have a county auditor. And the board wanted to add, which makes sense. If it's up to the board, they should allow what to do. They asked us because they wanted to hire a police auditor. Well, I brought that bill in. The bill passed the House and the Senate. I got permission from my colleagues, House, and it went to the governor, and the governor vetoed it. Now, my reaction to that, and probably it's the same as yours, it's none of the governor's gad darn business who the county board hires. And so we should be permitted to hire whomever we want. And so that's an area that we need to get some sort of support in order to change. Other jurisdictions already have that. The other areas of my bill that are worth exploring is it would allow the board, completely up to them, it's completely permissive, to expand the board. The way that they write it in statute for everyone else is between 5 and 11, I believe it is, 5 and 13, that you can expand your city council or your board.
The number of voting seats on the board.
That's right. In Arlington, it's very prescriptive in our statute. It says the board shall consist of 5 at-large members. And it's very specific and precise. No other locality has that specificity. They're allowed to have flexibility between a range of 5 and 13. And so I want to allow them to do that if that's their desire to do. The other thing that I mentioned about the code, which doesn't give them flexibility, is this: they should be elected at large. Other localities give the option for the board to decide whether they would be elected at large. It's totally legitimate if they want, by district or a hybrid. Other localities do that. And if you look around you, Alexandria, Fairfax, Prince William, Loudoun County are all elected by district. Now, you don't have to do that, but you would have the power to do that if you want. You could have a hybrid approach doing that. The other thing that you should understand is there are historical ramifications of this. What was happening in 1932 with how we treated people of color? No, it doesn't take a rocket science to look. Jim Crow, the Harry Bird machine, really wanted to maintain control over everything. And there are different pockets, especially you look at Knock, the Freedmen's Village, different pockets, neighborhoods. Halls Hill was another area that you could draw districts, and an African American or a person of color could have been elected to those districts. And at the time, they knew that that would not be possible if it was an at-large seat, means it covered the entire county, because there'd be enough white people to overtake that and prevent that. Virginia Beach was under court order by the feds for this very reason. and they were directed to draw their at-large seats into districts. And now they have African Americans that support them. Now, it got a little political because once that occurred, because the court had directed them to do that, they brought a bill to reflect the statute of what's currently happening. And the bill got all the way to the governor's desk, and the governor vetoed it. The governor vetoed it because he didn't like the dilution of having people of color being able to get elected into the system, even though that's how they operate, even though that's how they run now because of the court directive, a federal court directive. And so I want to avoid that being Arlington's fate as well, too, to allow them to do that.
The difference between Arlington and most Union counties is, which is that it's split into different districts. So that makes much sense because it's almost like expanded town or city.
Yeah.
So that's what seems to me, I don't know.
It's,
Counterintuitive.
have you ever heard people from South Arlington saying, we get the short end of the stick? I've heard that. I hear that all the time. Well, if you had districts, you may not have that problem. And then you hear people in the north now complaining, saying, oh, we're not able to get, because missing middle is a big issue. For better or worse, it's a big issue. And the north now, I'm hearing them saying that the board doesn't represent us. Now, I'm not prescriptive on how you should do it, and I'm not even saying it should be done. But I'm saying that there may be a board or a future board that thinks that you should be able to do this. Now, again, keep in mind, it wouldn't be restrictive to just one or the other. You could have a hybrid approach. And you could, if you wanted to, I'm not suggesting that this is what happens, but you could, if you wanted to, you could expand the board, which I hear a lot of the board members talking favorably about, from 5 to 7. And I missed another point that I wanted to raise that's in my bill, is to elect a permanent chair for 4 years. We're the only jurisdiction in Northern Virginia that doesn't do that. You know how we get our chair? Paul knows. We take turns. Everyone sort of rotates and takes their turn to do that. And that makes us a little bit weak when it comes to negotiating with our regional peers who have 4-year terms. The other exception is Alexander's a 3-year term for their mayor, but otherwise it's 4. Now I'll get to your second, Marjorie. But what I was saying is that you could expand the board to 7, and you could, if you wanted to, you could have a hybrid approach to districts. You could draw 3 districts modeled after the General Assembly, the House districts. I have the northwest part of Arlington. Adele McClure has central part of Arlington, and Alfonso Lopez has south part of Arlington. You could draw 3 districts like that. The nice thing I like about the way the Supreme Court drew Adele's district, the 2nd district, is that it's predominantly high-rise. It's a high-rise district is what we call it, because it represents people in the high-rises. And maybe the people in the high-rises should get special representation. So you could have 3 districts, you could have 3 at large, and then you could have 1 4-year chair. And that would make up your 7 seats on the county board. But again, what my bill would do is give them authorized authority to make that decision so that they don't have to ask the General Assembly for permission. Because I have to tell you, in my conversations with different board members, I think they'd like a good chunk of this, not all of it maybe. They wouldn't exercise that authority. But the nice thing is that if they or a future board wants to do it, they'd be allowed to do it. They wouldn't have to come to the General Assembly and ask permission for what every other jurisdiction around them and throughout the state already has that power. So I want to give them that power. So if they want to exercise it, they can. Marjorie.
This change form of government, especially if we rename it, because right now there's a lot of legislation book for a county manager form of government, because it only applies to us being a only county. And it lets us do a lot of things the way we'd like to do them.
Right.
Because over the years, these permissive bills been had by the judges. Several years ago, when firefighters changed,
Yeah.
concerned, all of that legislation Arlington essentially evaporates. It's go back to go. What the staffing has to be in your child care centers.
Right. 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 So I'm glad you asked that question because it's a clarifying question because everywhere I go when I talk about this question comes up. I'm not proposing that we change the county manager plan of government. I like it. I'm happy with it. I don't want to change it. What this does is it modernizes it. It updates it to keep up with everyone around. So everything else that you mentioned there would all stay in place. We'd still have our own charter, but we'd just have more powers to do things within that charter than anyone else.
It seems to me that when I look at the tickets with the issues, it doesn't get every county should do the same rule. But
yeah, well, most do. Most do. In fact, in the statute, they call it general law. And I look at this as an academic exercise. And the way I approached it, after I was so gosh darn mad that the governor vetoed my bill because I thought it was none of his darn business what the county board, who they want to hire. They should be able to hire whomever they want. And so I went to our legislative council, our legislative services, who sort of write all of our bills for us. Someone's been there for over 30 years, 3 decades. And I said, you're going to have to tell me, explain this to me. What other powers do other jurisdictions have that Arlington doesn't? And he gave me like a 5 or 6 page memo identifying about 7 different areas that other jurisdictions have the same power. In fact, any jurisdiction who comes to the legislature and says, I want to update our charter, this is what they give them. It's called general law. And most localities, probably 90%, maybe even higher than that, or above, are in that general law status. They all operate the same, with some exception. Arlington has its own charter, it's exception. So over the last 30 or 40 years, as general law, other localities were getting more powers to do things. Arlington didn't get any powers, they're just sort of sitting there in the corner because they were an afterthought. We're in a different charter and it never got updated. Meanwhile, you have powers that they want to update from time to time, the board wants to do. They have to come over us and ask permission. And I just don't think that that's right. So I'm essentially, what it boils down to is I'm taking power away from the General Assembly. I probably get my General Assembly card taken away from me if I'm saying this. I'm taking a power away from the legislature and giving it to the county board. That's all I'm doing. And they can do whatever they want. I'm not telling them. Yes. Wouldn't touch it. And that's another question because other localities, or the CivFed wants to ask that question. Should we become a city? And that is something that is a big conversation. I think there are pros and cons to it, but that has nothing to do with our form of government. I think it would have different effect, but I think we've got to look into whether that's something that's beneficial to Arlington. I feel like in the past, they've done sort of a pro-con list of the powers that cities have, which as you know, have greater authority to tax certain things than counties do. But at the end, I don't think that they've ever decided to do that. That's a question that's lingering, but it really is not directly associated to what we're doing here.
So it'd just be nice if they made it pack.
Yeah.
Is it in your bill, or is it known that if we make such a change, will it go to the vote?
Well, yes and no. The only thing, and I've heard Scott McCaffrey from the Sun Gazette, he has sort of come after my proposal on this question about allowing the voters to decide. In practicality, you can't ask the voters to decide every question. I couldn't come to the voters and say, how many board seats should there be? 5, 7, 9, or 11? That's not a yes or no question. Maybe we could do ranked choice voting. Maybe that's what he's talking about. Or I can't go to the voters and say, should our districts be at large, hybrid, or by district? That's not a yes or no question. The only yes or no question on a ballot, and that's usually what you're asked, the only yes or no question is whether or not you should have a 4-year term chair of the board. That's a yes or no. And in fact, in my bill, you'd be able to have a referendum for that. But again, that's all permissive. If the county wanted to exercise the authority to have a referendum, they'd have to expressly do so. They'd probably have to have an ordinance and have a hearing and then vote on it. And then that would, and they'd probably end up in the circuit court to ask the chief judge to sign off. I think that's how that referendum process works.
Go to second.
Well, but
Birds and three, one.
I suppose if the board decided to make that decision and then to ask for a referendum on that question, I think that they could do so. But it would be a little confusion because it's kind of a two-part question. Like, what if some people like 7, but they don't like hybrid?
Yeah.
And so they'd have to vote no on that.
Should Arlington change?
Well, yeah.
Oh.
Well, but except that that's what every locality has set up. I just want to give them flexibility. But again, it's like every decision a board member or even I have to make a vote. I vote on a couple thousand bills every session, and I have to decide where my constituents stand. That's at that point. I think if you have the power, that's the first step, is given the power. At the second point is the board needs to find out whether the public is supportive of it. I will tell you what I've done, and I talked to civic associations about this. I can tell you I put out a survey to my constituents. I got over 400 responses. 88% support each provision that I'm talking about. I think it was 409 said yes, 52 said no. So that's pretty overwhelming in the district to support. This is also supported by, in addition to the Civic Federation, who's been supportive of many of these ideas, not all of them, but they have other ideas too that are not in the bill. The NAACP chapter of Arlington also supports the legislation as well. And again, so I feel like I've got the public support. I feel like I got 2 leading organizations that collectively, I think represent a big part of Arlington. And I'm just trying to talk to as many voters as I can. I know the board members are looking for input as well too. They've asked to have a community forum on this. And I think the Civic Federation is going to do one. The Civ Federation is also interested in stuff like county board salaries. They're interested in the question that you asked, Paul, about city versus county. They're interested in questions about whether or not the board should run all at once or have staggering terms. That's an interesting concept. It's not one that is in my bill at all. I've heard some people say that, in other jurisdictions where that's done, you have this risk of having wholesale change to the board. And that's kind of interesting feedback. As someone who has run every year that I've run with all my colleagues all at the same time, House and the Senate. I don't know another institution except one that has staggered terms. The United States Senate has staggered terms, and this was well documented in the Constitution, but of course in the Federalist Papers, of why they wanted the House to be closest to the people, and they wanted the Senate to be more of a deliberative body, and they wanted to protect that in the Constitution. You go down to the state level, the Senate and the House all run up at the same time, no staggered terms. And then you get down to local government. I can't find a local government, sans Arlington, that has staggered terms. So it's Arlington in Virginia, County Board, and the United States Senate. So I think it's a valid question to ask. I think it's one that I'm trying to find out whether this was also part of the Jim Crow era as well, to try to not have a wholesale change and try to keep, if there's any change, to keep it more stabilized. I can't find any evidence that the staggered terms did that, but it certainly would have that effect. You wouldn't. It makes sense to me that you would not have a lot of changes if everyone were up at once. That's true, and just because you have one seat up. So I think you might accomplish some of that with, if you expanded the board to 7, you'd have to have 2 years where there are 2 running up. And so that's your opportunity. If you were really mad at the county government, you wanted to show your displeasure, you have 2 opportunities in the 4-year cycle to really make some big changes. So again, I think that's something that's being looked at. It's not part of my bill, but it is kind of interesting to think about. Marjorie.
Chair can serve.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I think it's a good question. You know, when we work regionally, and Paul can speak to this as well too, on just about every issue, every major issue, whether it's affordable housing, whether it's transit, whether it's environmental issues, even a lot of mental health, healthcare issues. We work as a region because anything that happens in Arlington probably happens in Alexandria, it probably happens in Fairfax, Prince William, and Loudoun. And a lot of the funding gets flowed regionally as well too. And so you have to make a lot of concessions and maybe take turns on different things. And when you're negotiating with a 4-year term, an individual has a 4-year term that is popularly elected versus someone that's just sort of the spokesperson that is not elected by the people, is just appointed, and they're only there for 1 year, it makes them weaker in those negotiations. And I've heard that from the Northern Virginia Chamber, that it makes us a little bit weaker when we come in to negotiate because you'll be negotiating with a different person and working regionally from year to year. And so there's not consistency in that. I think it's probably the same argument that we make about a president has a 4-year terms. You know, that's a long time. The governor of Virginia only has 1 term, only 4 years. And some people would argue that that's not, depends on the governor, but it's not long enough. But this is just 1 year. So this really is a short term. It takes a while to sort of get acclimated and meet your colleagues and have these discussions. So I think it would give us more power. And I think this is really what I'm trying to do, is give Arlington more power. And then that question also, and this question was asked about the people deciding. That's one you can directly ask the people if they want a 4-year term.
But just to be devil's advocate here, the argument could be that the county manager making some of those rather than the chair of the board.
Well, that could be true, although we'd have to change the statute to give the manager that kind of power. But we give them power over the county, but not so much for management decisions, but not so much for working regionally and representing. And again, it's not the way it's done elsewhere. And I think we should look elsewhere for that power. And then ultimately we let the people decide on that question. Paula.
What is that, the form of government, or, detail of government. But you mentioned, come up we make sure we don't lose money. How do we get funding? How do we get clear funding?
Yeah, that's, the question is about a permanent funding source for Metro, because Metro is, it's underfunded. And as Virginia, we're meeting our obligation. I think we just passed $150 million over the next 2 years to put towards Metro. I know Maryland and DC are meeting that obligation, but localities are also on the hook to have to start meet those obligations too. That's a great question because of the taxing power that Paul Ferguson mentioned, giving us a little bit extra authority to maybe find that permanent funding stream in Arlington would be helpful to do that. And I think that's a valid point. That's probably a pro if we were to become a city to be able to have that funding. I think there are other ways, obviously, that we have, other powers we have to get that funding that we've managed all these years to do. And of course, Fairfax and Loudoun and Prince William as well too. Alexandria is the one that we'd have to ask to see how beneficial it has been for them. My guess is they don't want to become a county, and but people do come up and say, should we become a city? I think it's a fair question. I think it's a long conversation to have. and one that I think could take years to explore and come to that conclusion. Well, we don't have years to face Metro. You're right. You're right. We've got it. Well, we'd be trying to find, yeah. Well, it would probably, depending on what you're taxing, but if it would have to come from the state. And the powers that localities have derive from the state. So we'd have to ask the state permission to do that. And the question is who does it apply to? Not everyone, Arlington is probably a heavy user of Metro versus say not as much. And so you'd want to apply this fairly to those people. But even when you apply it to Arlington just alone, but you got to think about Fairfax and Loudoun and Prince William. How much do they use the Metro versus us? And what's a fair approach to doing that? So I think it's a valid concern how Arlington is able to put its funding streams together to make up for their share of the shortfall. And Paul, correct me if I'm wrong. I think that the share is proportional to the Metro stops that you have. And so Arlington would have to put up more than other jurisdictions. I used to have the prestige of having the most Metro stops in the delegation, but since redistricting, I believe that title's gone to Adele. But bigger than that, now that they've moved Senator Favola's seat all entirely in Arlington, I think she actually has that distinction.
Sure. Talk about how this issue came up back in 32. You know what the population of Arlington?
It was about 25 or 30,000 people. So 220, 230,000, something like that. Yeah, so it's a different place. And we've grown quite a bit. Our budget, you can look at our budget, it's grown it's over $1 billion now. I think it's $1.5 billion now. And so it's our schools, of course. And that's the other thing is all the things that I'm talking about here. We haven't mentioned the schools because the Arlington County Board form governance structure and the schools are modeled identically. And so if you ask the question, and I don't want to bite this off right now, I think I want to get past the county board first. But if you want to have districts, should you have districts for school boards, for the school board, or should they be, have a permanent chair, a 4-year chair? Yeah. Oh, automatic. You may be right. I'll have to go. Yeah, I'll have to go look. I know it has its own separate statute, but it might refer to the process. But I just think, when I read the statute in Arlington, it was almost like, who wrote this? This is, obviously in the 30s. Who wrote this? Because the statute is very prescriptive, which is very uncommon to see in our code, where it says the Arlington County Board shall be comprised of 5 board members and shall be elected at large in staggered terms. And it was very prescriptive. And just that one sentence that I provided you is very strict and constrictive, overly constrictive. And I just want to loosen that up a little bit. Yeah.
Where's, is this a party issue or?
No.
So the logical court system.
Well,
Where's the angle?
to be very honest, Piazza, when she was chair, was very much against. I'm not saying she's right or wrong. Jill Piazza, the Arlington County Democratic chair. Before
What was she opposed to?
she was afraid that any of these changes that could potentially make these seats.
Oh, I see.
More
From a yeah. And I think, some people have said, and I'm here just to talk what the effect is of the bill and how it would impact. I don't want to be in a position of coming to a party and asking them permission to introduce a bill. Mainly for one reason. One, first, I've never done that before, but more importantly, is that's exactly what happened in 1932, is they came to the party and the party wanted to have, we're the party of Harry Byrd and constricting people's right to vote. I don't want to be told for reasons that were just articulated here that we don't want to lose seats. Now, I don't think we would lose seats if a district was drawn modeled after the 3 House districts, let's say. My district that I run in would be the least safe of the 3. And it's a 70% Democratic district. If I or another candidate can't win as a Democrat in that district, we have a candidate problem. We don't have a party problem.
Well, I think the political issue, speaking as a political scientist as opposed to something else, is that when you have a primary in an at-large district, everybody goes toward the mean. Whereas if you have districts, people would stake out rather polarizing positions. So that
In a primary.
in a primary. So you have a different decision process. You have a more adversarial process. You have more of a winner take all process within each district.
Well, I think that could be true, although I think what's likely to happen is you'd have more representative government. Like, again, to my point, you ever heard someone say that South Arlington gets a short end of the shrift? Well, they wouldn't get that with their own district. Here and now, North Arlington saying the same thing with missing middle. They're not representing our views on missing middle. They wouldn't get that because they'd probably get in a primary process, the person that would win would be pro whatever their issue is and would represent that group. Now, you might get a different Democrat in the general election, but from a political standpoint, you would not get any other party, in my view.
Your district. Higher. Southern district.
Yeah. I think Alfonso Lopez has about 2 or 3 precincts that are in Alexandria. And so you probably have to draw the district slightly different. So I'd probably have maybe 1 precinct less in my district. Adele might have 1 precinct less, and it would even itself out. And I think that's a temporary problem because I do think in the next redistricting cycle in 2030, I think you're probably going to have all 3 are going to be equal. As our population grows, you're going to have much more. The 3rd district's going to move more into Arlington as our population grows. And that'll just get easier and it'll be very clean to do it by 2030 is my prediction.
Your bill just consider changes in the Arlington Charter, or and again, obviously the answer is yes. What if you just ask for Arlington to be under the general specification?
Well, if I did that, then that would do away with the county manager plan of government. That would do away. We like the county manager plan of government, which is our own charter, and we want to retain that, and this would allow that to be retained. So going into general law would mean that we'd have to find some other means to run our government. They're their own city. They're the city. Well, it's city, so it's a city charter, I believe. Yeah, I don't know if they have their own charter or not, but it's operated as a city. No, but they have some. Well, they got a city manager. Yeah, and they got a mayor. Well, yes. Well, that under the county manager, you could actually, if you wanted to, you could adopt what Fairfax has. Fairfax has a county executive form of government, and they have a county executive that does run their government in a very similar way. I think there are some differences, but it is similar. But again, I feel like that might be a bridge too far. I get enough questions about what we're trying to do here, like what Marjorie asked about changing. I don't want to wholesale change. I'm not interested in doing that. I think we have a government that's well run, but I just think over the years we've given up too much power.
They usually is amenable to amending legislation if that's something that will bring people together.
Yep.
This kind of discussion is good, and sometimes the legislation that he puts in to start with sometimes changes before
Often.
it winds up going to the full
Yep.
body.
Yep. Often changes.
Well,
Yeah.
anybody have any off the wall, non-relevant questions for Patrick on everything else?
That's right. Only unserious questions only.
The number of pieces of legislation that you consider. And you only meant for a couple of months.
Yeah.
That's astounding.
Yeah.
How much of that is, both one that's still around this meeting? It's serious.
Yeah.
Pieces of
Changes in the statute. I mean, it's changes in the statute. Well, we're broken up by about 14 different committees, and each committee has a docket. I have the courts committee has the biggest docket of any committee. I probably had about 250 or 300 bills just in my committee, but other committees are taking up bills, hundreds of bills. And
I'll give you an example of my favorite, okay? There are many state universities in Virginia, and there are legal offices at each state university. They have university lawyers, right? There was a bill to make the university lawyer report to the president of the university rather than the attorney general, okay? And it passed the legislature, and Governor Youngkin vetoed it because he didn't feel that the university council should report to the president of the university. He felt very strongly that they shall report to the attorney general.
right, which injects politics into this, doesn't it? Because you can lose your job, because we've known attorney generals that have fired. Ken Cuccinelli has had different people fired. Yeah.
It's, I work on early voting program. How many times? And then we have every single year.
Right. No. Marjorie says no. Yeah, it does.
People like Martin have done this for about 30 years.
Yeah. I don't know how you do it. I mean, it would require constitutional change in order to do that, because you have the federal years, which are the even number years, and the state are odd years. And there's just no way to get out. It's only an even or odd, and you're going to have elections every year because of that.
And then you'd have to mandate, a 12-step program for people who are addicted to voting every year.
That's right. That's right. I mean, as I don't know how this. There used to be a time where I'd seen some numbers where if the state were up during the federal years, like I would love to run in a year like this because the turnout's so high, and in some way, I mean, as Democrats, we're all Democrats here, we're family. That's democracy, is when you have more people come out to express. I mean, it's just pitiful when you only have 10, 15, 20% of the population will vote on an office versus when you have 70 or 80%. That's real democracy. That's real representative government, because you're getting in touch with what the people want. And so we're, as Democrats, support that kind of high voter turnout. Now, when we have state years, it's not too shabby, except on those off year elections, it tends to be. But those gubernatorial years, that will be one of the second highest turnouts, and that's good. I'd like to get on that schedule at least, but if I had to change. But anyway, I just feel like we want to encourage more people to come out to vote. I totally get what you're saying, Paula, in terms of trying to get more people to come, because it is hard when you're sitting at the polling place and it's just there's hardly anyone there, and so we got to figure out a way to get people more enthused about practicing that muscle and using it and getting out to vote every single year. That'd be a constitutional in order, because it's in our constitution that we have when we have our state elections. That's the one that's contributing to this problem. It's not the local, it's purely state. No. That was not an unserious question. Well, you do, but I was saying that we'd have to change that. Yeah. No, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. That's true. Very true. All right. Any other questions?
One thing I wanted to raise with you is that, the Inflation Reduction Act has a lot of federal programs for climate change, solar panels,
Yeah.
and those programs, at least as administered at the state of Virginia level, are not very friendly to condominiums who want to put solar panels on their facility. And you all ought to really look at that, because I would hope
Okay.
that the first communities in Arlington to have solar panels would be the large condo buildings where they make the most sense.
Yeah, that's a good point. Good point. Thank you, Bob. All right. Anyone on the phone? Did you have a question or anything? Ignore you. Even though I'm right in front of you. Well, thank you. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to eat my lunch now. Yeah. Now, Bob, do you want to continue the program or whatever you do?
We'll next meet on the second Tuesday of September, and we're in the heat of the political campaign season, so please join us then. Thank you so much for coming.